Regarding Men, Episode 22. Hashtag Mean Girls 2.
Well, hello. Here we are with episode 22, I believe, and I'm Janice Fiamingo. I do the Fiamingo file, and I'm here with Paul Elam of A Voice for Men and an Ear for Men, the wonderful Paul, and also with the equally wonderful, I was trying to think of another word, but the equally wonderful Tom Golden of Men Are Good. And we're talking about a strange article, but a very serious subject today. It's related to Me Too. And I think what it really concerns is the continued expansion of Me Too, the continued politicization of all male bad behavior if women perceive, even well after the fact, after a consensual relationship, if women perceive that they were treated badly. There have always been badly behaved men who are not particularly nice to women, especially in romantic or sexual relationships. We used to call them things like cads. In the 18th century, I think they were called rakes. There are all sorts of different terms for them. Men who, well, we don't know this is even true, of course, about this particular man, but we'll get to him in a minute. But men who use women for their own sexual pleasure, and in the process, lots of people, of course, use others for their own sexual pleasure, but in the process make the recipient of their attentions feel bad, feel used, it seems. Maybe not at the time, since this case that we're talking about is a case where many women enthusiastically pursued relationships with this man and stayed in sexual relationships with this man and even remained friends with him for years afterwards and are now calling him out. But it seems that in retrospect, sometimes years afterwards, they are now angry at this person, and this has become the subject of an article. So the article, which is a very, very long, bizarre, actually fascinating initially, but ultimately boring article it's in the Daily Beast, and it's called 8 Women Accuse Hollywood Filmmaker Max Landis of Emotional and Sexual Abuse. Now, Max Landis, for anybody who doesn't know, I certainly didn't know, is the son of John Landis, who's a pretty famous director, I guess. He made American Werewolf in London, one of my favorite films when I was a teenager. And what's the other one? Oh, yeah, Animal House. So Max Landis is his son, who I guess is a screenwriter and quite a fairly well-known, I guess, sexy young guy in Hollywood. And this is an article, and it's interesting that he is accused of emotional and sexual abuse, because one of the things that's most striking about the article is that although it names sexual abuse that he committed, in many ways the sexual abuse he's alleged to have committed, though it's not clear any of these women are interested in going to the police, it's not clear that they want to have him charged criminally. But the sexual abuse seems to be of lesser importance to many of these women and to the article writer than the emotional abuse. And so a lot of them talk extensively about how he drew them into his circle, how he manipulated, how he made them fall in love with them, and then, used them badly, would sometimes shower attention on them, at other times would ignore them, would make them feel, this sort of abject longing for him, all these kinds of things. And the article goes into great detail about this. And so to me, what is one of the things that's interesting about the article, there's so many interesting things about the fact that somebody would see fit to write a serious, long, well-researched article about such a subject, is that to me, it represents the expansion of Me Too into now these other areas of emotional misconduct on the part of men. And so although the article does allege, pages and pages into it, that he has actually sexually assaulted women, or the women allege that he has, that doesn't seem to be the primary thing. It's almost as if it would have been enough merely that he was an emotionally manipulative person. And so although I already have problems with the idea of so-called calling out men for sexual abuse, I actually think, I'm not quite sure where I stand on this, but I actually think that it should be illegal to name men who have been, who are alleged sexual abusers. Until they have been convicted of something, I really think their identities should be shielded, given the devastating personal and professional consequences for those men, whether they're ever found guilty in a court of law of the alleged abuse or not. I think there would be a case to be made to shielding their identities. But certainly in this case, what's happening is that now Me Too seems to be going even further, so that women are being encouraging one another to come forward to complain about men's behavior, even though what the behavior that he's alleged to have done, that behavior is not criminal by any stretch of the imagination. And so now even that is treated seriously as a subject for an extensive investigative report that should result, according to the article, in the man's personal and professional ruination and in some kind of punishment that's never really articulated directly, but that we are certainly supposed to believe he's worthy of. And I think it's a very scary development. It means that any man who has ever, not even necessarily behaved badly, but ever ended a relationship badly, with a woman feeling that he didn't treat her in the way she wanted to be treated, if he has any kind of public profile at all, or even if he doesn't, can be similarly called out. And I know men who have lost jobs and been publicly humiliated by being called an abuser, even though none of the allegations had anything to do with actual criminal abuse. So yeah, it's a very disturbing development, and I don't even know what one could possibly do to stop it, except that we have to stand up as a society and say that these kinds of allegations are laughable, or are worth absolutely nothing.
I know one way to stop it. Hold women accountable for their own decisions.
Oh, the hell you say.
Mm-hmm. Tom.
What on earth? Tom, what are you thinking?
It's what I kept thinking the whole time I was reading that article. It's like, honey, you could have said no and walked away, over and over and over again, but they kept coming back. And it's like, okay, but where does your choice come in here? We talk about women's choice, right? Well, they didn't make a good choice here. They just kept coming back over and over again.
Yeah.
Whose fault is that? It wasn't Max.
Now they're all ganging up. And
now they're all ganging up. I think they're actually embarrassed that they were basically fooled by this guy in so many ways. But this guy's he's got power, he's got money, and he knew how to show them a really good time. He's spending lots of money on these parties, $50,000 for a party where only certain people can come, these celebrity parties. It's like, that's very seductive for these women. It's like Paul says, men use power to get sex. Women use sex to get power. So they see this guy who's got power and money and fame. What do? Give him sex, then they get some of that. So we're not talking about that piece of things here. And I think that really needs to come out. Mm-hmm. That it was their choice to be there. They were doing that for a number of reasons that they're not talking about.
Right.
There's another element to this that I'd like to explore, if you guys will bear with me for a couple of minutes for a personal anecdote. And I'll put on my channel links below to a 2-part video series I did 8 or 9 years ago called On Going to War with Women. It really wasn't about going to war with women. It was a very true, my experience post-divorce, when I came to a point in my life that I realized that the way I operated with women had to change radically. I had just ended up in meaningless, dead-end relationships, a bad marriage, the whole 9 yards, and I just wanted things to be different. So I started paying attention to guys that operated like Landis.
Right.
And who were not necessarily very friendly to women, and who certainly weren't white knights, and who, I didn't treat women badly, but I more or less would show a little bit of interest and then ignore them, and they came running. They did. There's a period of my life where just an abundance of sexual partners, and I didn't allow any of them to pin me down to a commitment. And then I started getting feedback. This was within a networked social group that this happened. And guess what the feedback was after I had been successful with a lot of women there? It was the same nature of complaints you read in this article, that I did things like I showed interest and then I wasn't interested, and I took them out to a nice dinner and then I didn't pay attention to them, and then I didn't do this. And what it was all saying to me in the end was that I didn't let any of them get their hooks in me.
Right.
And at first they were all competing with each other. And I'm not trying to brag here, but I am telling the truth. This is how it happened. They were all competing with each other. And then when it became apparent that I wasn't going to have anybody's hooks in me, that I wasn't going to commit to any of these women, they all turned on me at once and were bad-mouthing me all over the place. Man, when I read this article, that's exactly what popped up into my mind. Is here's a guy enormously successful with women. And I mean, I didn't have near going for me what he had going for him. He had a famous father, rich family, powerful career. Women lined up. The women in Hollywood are notorious for lining up for casting couch sessions and for being attracted to these rich, powerful men.
Right.
And then when they couldn't get him, all of a sudden, he's the devil incarnate.
Boom.
And that's all I saw in this story, was a bunch of frustrated women whose ambitions he ruined. Women line up for these guys. This is, whether anybody wants to accept it, admit it or not, and certainly many women don't want to accept this, feminists don't want to accept this at all. But this guy's behavior attracts a lot of women.
Yes.
We don't have to like that. We don't have to think it's the greatest thing in the world. And frankly, it's not. I mean, I found when I was emulating that kind of behavior, I got out of it because I ultimately found it unfulfilling and shallow. It was just a dead end emotionally, even sexually, it was a dead end.
Yes.
But this is what attracts hordes of women. And I'm sorry, you have to take that up with God or Darwin as you please.
Exactly.
I didn't make women like they are, and I didn't make men like they are. But the fact of the matter is that these guys that we typically refer to as a-holes, if they've got money and they're indifferent to women and smug about themselves, women will line up to get in bed with them.
And tell them they need to lose weight and tell them there's something wrong with them. They need to fix this. I mean, that's what this guy was doing, was negging him, all the time. And women respond to that. It's sad but true.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we don't know that the things they're alleging about him are even all true.
Exactly.
This is just ridiculous gossip mongering, substituting as some kind of serious reporting. But if it is true, well, yeah, okay, that's not very nice. And but that is the truth. I mean, and what feminists will say, of course, is that yes, women are like this, but it's because of the context of powerlessness within which women are forced to operate. No matter what happens in the world, no matter how much the society promotes and encourages women's advancement and equality, etc., feminists will always say that not enough has been done, and that this was a man with power, and this is how women are forced to behave. But it's not true, because there is something deep in male and female psyches that makes this kind of behavior common. And I recognized this when I was a teenager and I used to go roller skating. All of the girls were attracted to the bad boys, and those were not even bad boys with power. We were all lower middle class and working class kids at roller skating. The best guy, the best he could hope for was an old Datsun 510 that he lowered and put mag wheels on. And these were not privileged, wealthy, powerful young men. Far from it. But they were surly, they were sexy, and we women, young women, girls, really were attracted to that. And that, that is just the way it is. There's probably some, psychobiological evolutionary explanation for it. So to pretend that this is somehow a feminist issue and that it should be called out in those terms is completely false. And what is so astounding is what you said, Tom, at the very beginning. That these women, I mean, this is a startling revelation, really. It's horrifying of what the supposedly liberated woman, the supposedly enlightened feminist woman will do with herself when given half a chance. And this is not confined to Hollywood, although maybe it's magnified by 10 times there, but it is not confined to Hollywood. This is what women do. And they can read all the feminist theory they want about women's empowerment and women making their autonomous choices and women's agency and women are powerful and women are wonderful. And they still go after these guys and they still allow themselves to be treated badly in this way. And they still accept it when the guy says, you've got to, you need to lose weight. And of course, they do it too, but it only counts when men are doing it to women. Then it becomes a feminist issue. Can you imagine a bunch of guys sitting around and calling in to some reporter and saying, she used to tell me I had a beer gut. She was so mean to me. And then that gets all written up about some woman. And well, women do this to men all the time. Women play all sorts of vicious emotional games, head games with men. They rang on them. They criticize them. They say terrible things. They gossip about them behind their backs, just like this guy did. But it's not an issue because partly men don't make it an issue, and because our society doesn't have that kind of empathy for badly treated men, for men who get burned by nasty women. So the fact that these women will not accept that they were autonomous agents in this relationship, to use a feminist lingo, that they will not accept they were full participants in their own abuse, says it all for me about what supposed feminist liberation is doing for women. And it's not doing anything good, that's for sure.
That's interesting that your comment about men not having the same kind of reaction. I think that's exactly right. I think it's totally right. I think men look at that and they go, she was a jackass, and they move on to the next thing. They don't think about it as being abuse. They think about it, well, lost that one, next.
Or they do think about it as being abuse, but then, they take responsibility for it. They say, well, okay, I've got a history. And I'm sure lots of men do have a history of being attracted to abusive women.
Absolutely.
Either physically abusive or psychologically abusive, because bad girls are often pretty attractive too in different ways.
Yeah.
So
men are also prone to say, if somebody says, oh, you need to lose, you got a terrible beer gut, you need to lose that beer gut, to say, oh, yeah, that reminds me, go get me a beer. And I'm saying that in all seriousness, that just the male psyche on that level of so-called mistreatment,
right,
is like,
more
guys are just not prone to take that seriously.
Right.
They're not prone to feel it or experience it as abuse. There's like, okay, she said something dumb or she said something mean. Now, it can certainly increase and escalate to a lot more than that, to things that are truly hurtful. But on that level, I mean, for these women to bring up, and I'm sorry, I've got this sort of callousness about this. My attitude is, if you can't open a beauty magazine without feeling terrible about your body, you need therapy. and lots of it. If you're so at the mercy of what somebody might say at any moment in your life, or what you might read somewhere, then, I mean, how much coddling and protection does anybody need? And I think sometimes, even in the men's movement, we get carried away a little bit with being too quick to identify as a victim in this. Some of these things, I'm sorry, yeah, I do have a beer gut. I mean, it's not even from beer. I have a carbohydrate gut, though. And that's okay. That's part of who I am. And I'm all right with it. But some of this is just so snowflakey.
Mm-hmm.
To me, this whole article was snowflakey.
It's Yes.
I really think that you're right, that men have a certain immunity to stuff like that. It's like it just doesn't stick with us. But with women, this article showed over and over again that it does stick with women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, if somebody treated a guy like that, the guy would just go, forget about it. I'm not going to be around you anymore. Fuck you. That's all would happen. Boom.
Yeah, or he wouldn't, but he would not then, some men stay in bad relationships for sure, but sometimes. Then they would not 5 years later make it into some kind of federal case and expect that somebody's going to write an article about it. That's
Start a movement about it.
Yeah, movement about it. Exactly. I mean, that like I found, like, it is sad, and I have to say that it's true that women are made that way. You know, that we do, I think, obsess about our physical imperfections, and we are deeply hurt. I mean, I remember when I was a 15-year-old girl on the beach with my friends, and some of the boys from roller skating, I keep going back to that, happened to, I don't even know if it was by accident or they had planned to meet us there, and they were teasing me about my big bum. And it bothered me, and it bothered me for years later, you know, but, you know, so what? That's just it. That, like you said, Paul, blame Darwin. You know, this is just, like, it's just the way it is, and it is sad, and these are part of and these things deserve to be spoken about even, you know, like all this dysfunction, it definitely is worth talking about, but not in the context of the feminist framework where it's all about an entitled man. I mean, I think this Max Landis probably has serious personal problems. He probably needs psychotherapy too, just as all his willing victims do. But to make it into a feminist issue, a Me Too issue, and to pretend that he alone is responsible for his bad behavior and that he alone should be punished and ruined for it is just nonsensical.
Well, it is nonsensical, except to one thing, unfortunately, is that, you know, I also see this because they put emotional abuse in the headline. This isn't accidental.
Right.
It's intended to bring the realm of emotional abuse into the Me Too sphere.
Exactly.
So that any woman who's ever heard anything that hurt her feelings now has a Me Too case against the big bad, preferably white male in a power position, so that she can destroy him. That's what that part of this is about. And it's as transparent, and the society will stand by and watch that happen.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and do nothing about it.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's the really scary thing about it, that people reading this article, a lot of people reading this article are going to say, yeah, that is abuse, you know, and we need to take it seriously, as they would never do if the situation were reversed and it were men complaining, you know, about what a woman had done.
When are they going to arrest him?
Yeah, that's it. Something ought to be done. He should be drummed out of Hollywood. He shouldn't have any more, you know, he shouldn't have any more screenwriter positions or whatever. It's amazing. And the fact that the women are full participants is somehow, you know, you're not even allowed to mention that, because then you're victim blaming. Yeah.
Oh God, no, we can't blame victims. It's
No.
even emotional victims.
Yeah, I
This
know.
is such a joke.
Yeah,
It really is.
So I think maybe it's time to give our awards. What do you think?
I think so.
Good.
Yeah, now we had a hard time here finding a humanitarian in this whole situation, since this is a kind of cultural dynamic that seems to be just going wild these days, that it's very difficult, or it seems that very few stand up against it, but we did come up with one. Did you want to say, Paul, who you were thinking of?
Who was I thinking of?
You were thinking of Mike Pence.
Mike Pence.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Mhm.
Well, sorry, senior moment there.
Okay.
But Mike Pence, for a very good reason. Mike Pence is now associated with the hashtag Mike Pence rules. And his rules are that he's not alone with women, period, except his wife.
Yep.
That means he does not meet women for business without his wife, not alone, never one-on-one, and he does not go to parties where alcohol is served without his wife. And guess what? Mike Pence is not going to find himself the subject of a Daily Beast article about something he may or may not have done at some party somewhere in 1973.
Yep.
And of course, they have launched articles. A Daily Beast, I think it was a Daily Beast, that did an article condemning him for the Mike Pence rules, saying, oh, does he really think that he's so sexually, I mean, this is how they read it. They thought that Mike Pence thought he was so sexually alluring that he couldn't trust himself in the presence of women. No, idiots. He doesn't trust society. to react to anything from a woman's allegation, so he has very smartly, very wisely ruled them out of his presence. And more men, I guarantee you, I can almost promise you that there have been a number of women with doors silently closed in their face over the Me Too movement because they represent risk. I know that some employers are saying, not going to hire women if I don't have to,
Right.
because I can get sued for discrimination in employment, or I can get sued for sexual harassment or something along those lines. And I would rather get sued for discrimination than for something along the lines of sexual harassment. It's a matter of risk management, which is what men do, or they should do, and they're learning to do more where it concerns women. So Mike Pence, we salute you for the humanitarian award for setting an example for how men can take care of themselves.
Indeed.
Yeah,
Indeed.
it's a pretty dire situation, because of course a lot of men don't want to live like Mike Pence, especially young men. But wow, it's we really are heading back into the Victorian age, in which all interactions between men and women will have to be monitored, and you have to be introduced to somebody before you can even speak to them or call them by their first name. It's quite amazing that the feminist so-called sexual revolution, the liberation movement has led us so quickly to this. But that says something again about human nature, I guess, or female nature, perhaps. Yeah,
absolutely. And what about we have a PUTA award to give to?
Yes. So, well, we think all of the 8 women accusers who were so concerned about emotional abuse, and especially, wasn't it Amy Zimmerman who wrote the article, who thought, I mean, this is really the longest article I think I've ever read on a topic as thin and inconsequential, although of course it is significant as this one. But yeah, Amy Zimmerman, who spent many thousands of words enumerating all of the ways that Max Landis emotionally abused women, she deserves, and the 8 accusers as well deserve our PUTA award.
So Amy and the 8 Anons.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes, a pack of PUTAs.
They'll be riding in no time, I'm sure. There they go.
There they go.
Fly away.
Goodbye, Amy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Well,
we finished?
there we go. Yeah. Yeah. Another
we're
cheery
done.
episode. All right.
Done.
I want
Thanks
to
for
remind
hanging
everybody,
with us.
tickets to ICMI in the description area. Sign up for the Regarding Men newsletter in the description area. Join us on that newsletter. We just discussed before, they're banning us from social media platforms. They're coming after voices they don't want to hear. This is a way to stay connected to us and for us to stay connected to you, which is most important.
Regardingmen.com. Come on, see us. All right, then.
Okay.
We'll see you next week.
Sign
Take
up
care.
then. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.